The purpose of this tutorial is for us to look at the process that we've got to go through when we're going to prepare and, dare I say, plan an essay. So here's the question that we're working on. Through the medium of film, the Truman Show presents ideas that are thought-provoking, discuss making detailed reference to the Truman Show. Okay, first of all, notice that the Truman Show is underlined. So when we write it in an essay, we always underline the Truman Show. If you're doing a typed thing, you can use italics, but that's the rule when we're discussing a whole text. So it says through the medium of film. So it's saying that film is the thing that leads to the thought-provoking moments. And the other thing says discuss making detailed reference to the Truman Show. So that means that in each body paragraph that you present, you must be talking about detailed examples from the film. So you might talk about a scene, and in that scene you will talk about the ideas that are presented. You might use a quote. You're very often are going to use a quote, and then you're going to support it with some of the ways that the film is constructed. So that might be through the camera angles, it might be through the lighting, the sound, the dialogue, but it also can be through symbolism, it can be through contrast, it can be through characterization, etc., etc. So there are lots of things that we can look at there. What is a good idea to make sure that you know you're answering the question is when you get the question, rewrite it in your own words. So what I've done in blue here is I've written two questions that make sure that I'm focused on all the aspects of the question. So what is thought-provoking in the Truman Show? And the second thing, how does film construct this? Okay, so they're the two things that I'm going to make sure that I'm working on and putting into each of the paragraphs. Once we've done that, we have to think about it and say, well, what is it in the Truman Show that is thought-provoking? What is the purpose of the film? Yes, it is a form of entertainment. It's a great film, and it performed very well at the box office. But underneath that, there is a message, and the film does challenge the reader to think about particular things. So you need to decide what it is that it is actually challenging you to think about, or challenging audiences to think about. You might not agree with it, but if you take the wider lens of talking about how it was received by audiences and what they might read into it, then that's a way of getting around that. So the film challenges the audience to think about things such as consumerism and capitalism. So it presents an exaggerated world for us to be able to reflect and think about what impact capitalism and consumerism is having on our life. Underneath that, if we look at the character of Truman, we can see things like, it makes us question freedom. We look at Truman and how free is he, and then that allows us to see and think about how free we are in our society when we're impacted on by consumerism and capitalism. We look at things like power and identity and manipulation by those in power, and you know, they all sort of swirl together quite a bit. The superficiality of the American dream and that consumerist ideal of having really good things, you know, appearing to be really successful, but maybe the reality is different, and maybe there's something more to life than just having consumer goods. Okay, so we looked at manipulation. We might look at this idea of isolation, and that Truman is isolated in his world, and reflect upon that and say, well, does capitalism do that to individuals in our world? We might question this notion of happiness, and what is happiness, and what does it mean to be happy? Is it having a Maserati car, or is there something else? Okay, so basically we know that the film fits the sci-fi genre. It is a dystopian fiction, and these things are warnings to society. Okay, they're warning society about the possible consequences of letting consumerism, capitalism go too far. The film is an exaggeration of our world. We've talked about that term cognitive estrangement, which is a science fiction term. It means that the world is very similar to our own, but it's an exaggeration. And through that exaggeration, it challenges us, and it warns us of the possibilities of not questioning and thinking critically about the implications of things such as rampant consumerism. What we're going to look at from now is we're going to look at one way that you can structure your essay. This is a basic building block, and you might find that you'll take aspects of it and that you'll go on your own way and you'll pick different things. But obviously, once we've come up with our thesis, what we have to do is the dreaded planning. Okay, and so generally speaking, you're going to have 2 or 3 body paragraphs. And so I think a mind map's a really good way of doing it, and that way you can clearly see that. And so generally speaking, what will happen is your ideas will either fit into setting, they'll fit into characterization, or they'll set into themes. Okay, and so one thing we might do is we might look at Sea Haven and look at how it has been constructed and what it's saying. And you know, and then we might look over here and say, okay, I want to talk about Truman and how he's represented and his plight for freedom, and look at that. And then for themes, we might look at this idea of appearance and reality. That might be what we do. It might be something to do with conflict, or you might want to think, oh, I want to talk about Christoph here. I've been talking about Truman, I've been talking about Sea Haven and the setting and all those utopian, dystopian stuff. And then we want to get down here and maybe somehow I want to talk about Christoph. So maybe it will come through that way. You might have the idea of manipulation. There are lots and lots of things you can do. But if you take the time to plot your ideas out here in a plan, it'll make the actual writing of it a lot easier. And so you might just put in dot points here a couple things. So you've got an idea about, you want to talk about utopia, and you might then talk about dystopia. You're going to talk about a technique, a film technique that's used. And then you might put a quote. And if you've got all that set there to go, and you do the same for your other paragraphs, then when you get to the writing section, it's all there in front of you, and you can concentrate on how you're going to say it, the style you're going to use. Okay, and that makes it a lot easier. And then obviously what we'll do is we'll try and fit it into the introduction, the body, and the conclusion. When we've got these 3 points here, it makes your introduction really easy, because these headings form the basis of your introduction. So you've got your thesis, you've worked out what you're going to argue, and then you are going to introduce the ideas that you're going to talk about. Then when it comes to the body paragraphs, here's your topic sentence, the setting, or you might use the word Sea Haven. That forms your topic sentence, and you write a sentence about that, and you're proving how setting is thought-provoking, how the characterization of Truman is thought-provoking, and the use of the skillful use of appearance and reality, that theme. They challenge the audience to think about, or they provide a warning or something like that. Okay, so topic sentence, and then you've got all this supporting evidence that falls underneath it. And then your conclusion will look very much like your introduction, where you restate your thesis, what you've argued, and the points you've made. The purpose of an introduction is simply to introduce your thesis, the main argument that you're going to put forward, and then you introduce the things you're going to talk about. And so it doesn't have to be too long. In the HSC up until last year, you could get away with 2 to 3 sentences, state your thesis, introduce your ideas, and get into the body of your essay. So here's what we can do. Rather than just jumping straight into the Truman Show, begin your essay and begin your introduction with making a statement about the purpose of film as a medium. Okay, so obviously film is fiction, and its role is primarily to entertain, but really the role of any good fiction is to engage with the reader or the viewer and challenge them with interesting ideas. And so if you start with that and say that film as a form of fiction has the power to challenge ideas or question society, or to make audiences reassess their values, or to get them to ignite a spark of interest in an idea. Begin with something like that, set up that platform, And the idea of any good fiction is to provoke thought. It's and that's where the question comes in. So once we've done that, we've got a nice sentence that sets that sort of premise. Then what we'll do is we'll introduce the Truman Show, mention that it was by Peter Weir, and come up with some sort of statement too, where you're saying, while it is a great form of entertainment, it does just do that, what we're saying with the purpose of film. But it does challenge audiences to think about the ideas that are being presented. Get them to question their own reality. And we can do that through a number of things. I've put here that it satires the American way of life. You might like to say through the genre of science fiction or dystopian fiction. It establishes a world that is reflective of ours, and it challenges us to think about the same sort of impacts in our world, things such as capitalism and consumerism. So anyway, introduce the Truman Show, make a statement about what it is that the film is doing, and then from there, in a sentence, introduce the main ideas that you're going to talk about. Okay, what are those ideas, and that make a statement that they do challenge the audiences to question their reality. Okay, from here what we'll do is we'll look at that in action. Here's a template that you can use for your paragraph if you like. So if you follow these 4 steps, that's really what you essentially need. Once you've mastered that, obviously you can move around in that. But basically, for our body paragraphs, we must begin with a topic sentence. So if we've done a mind map and we've got 3 key ideas on it, and one of it, for example, is setting, that's going to be the focus. That's the idea, the focus of our topic sentence. So we're going to focus on a key idea, and we're going to explain in that sentence that the idea, such as the setting of Sea Haven, provokes thought. We're going to answer the question. So we're making a deliberate instruction here, or we're making a deliberate statement. We're saying it's this thing that provokes thought, and then so once we've done that, here's our example. So we might even use a qualifying word like skillful, and we'll say the skillful construction of setting in the town of Sea Haven challenges the audience to question the impact of consumerism on our lives. That might be the sentence that we use. Once you've got that opening sentence, your topic sentence, it's a really good idea to clarify what you mean. So write another sentence where you actually expand on that idea and you talk about Sea Haven, for example. So just clarify what you mean. Then from there, what you're going to do is you're going to provide evidence from the film. This is where you get in. Remember that there were 2 things that we had to do in this essay. One was talk about how film is thought-provoking, and the second thing said discuss with detailed textual reference. Okay, so this in the body paragraph, once we get to this point 3, what we have to do is we have to get in and talk about the film. Give specific examples. So that might come from a particular scene. That's generally what people will do. They'll look at one scene. In this one, obviously with the setting, we'd start with the opening of the film and look at how it was constructed. It is okay too, depending on what you're talking about, to take a couple things from different parts of the film and put them together if they're supporting your idea. So if you're not using setting, character and theme, but you're using ideas and you wanted to talk about morality, it might be that you mention something that's occurring at the start of the film and then something that makes a link to the end of the film. You can do that. But anyway, back to here. We're providing evidence. And I've put here, let's put in 3 specific things. Obviously, some people need a number, so I just made one up. But, like our body paragraphs have to have good detail in them. So I've put in here, talking about a scene, make one thing that you talk about a quote. And obviously you're going to explain it and develop it. Make sure you support that then, and the statement that you're making about the setting and how it's thought-provoking. You're going to use a filmic technique. And then obviously there's another thing, because we've got 3. I'm going to leave that up to you because there are lots of other things that you can talk about. Okay, but the idea is to get in and talk in detail about how the film proves the statement that you're making, and you're going to provide that evidence to back up your argument. And once you've done that and you've had a good discussion, you've explored that in detail, the last thing you're going to do is use a connective word. Therefore, as a result, hence, thus, in conclusion. Notice they all have a comma after them. So, therefore, you come back to the key idea. Therefore, the masterful construction of setting challenges the audience to question their reality. Something like that. So what we do is we use a connective, one of these words, and then we re-answer the question. So we started up here and we set it up and we said it provokes thought. The idea answers the question. We provide our evidence, and then our last sentence of our body paragraph returns to answering the question. So now if we look at our sample paragraph, following on from what we did just before, we can see that we're talking about setting, and we're going to talk about Sea Haven. That's our idea, and we're going to open with something like, we use a setting to provoke thought about the impact of consumerism and advertising on our lives. Okay, so we're directly answering the question, we're introducing this idea of setting and the town of Sea Haven. Now what we're going to do is we're going to try and clarify that a little bit. So we're going to talk about maybe inside the show, like in the Truman Show, product placement is everywhere, and there's a quote, everything's for sale, and we might just talk about the concept of the show, and that, you know, it's built around this perfect world, and Truman's dropped into that. From there we'll start looking at how Peter Weir's constructed that. So we can say that the world has been exaggerated and that it is established as a utopia. So it's the perfect world. And what we see is that it is the perceived perfect world, and that through watching the things going on and the daily routines and the false greetings and all that sort of stuff, all that insincerity, we come to see that Truman is really lacking something, and you know, it seems like the perfect world, but really he's looking for more. He's searching for freedom. He wants adventure, and Sea Haven is holding him back. Okay, and then if we continue with the construction, we could talk about in those opening scenes the idea of the manicured lawns that they're cultivated to really strictly controlled there, which demonstrates the lack of freedom in that world. We can look at the predictable routine of the characters, and you can use the quote, good morning, and in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, good night. And that highlights the lack of spontaneity. That everything is set into a cycle and nothing deviates from that. It's a really controlled world. We can look at the insincere dialogue. So at the very beginning of the film, we hear the character say, "Oh, it's a truly blessed life," and she's talking out of character as the actor there, Meryl that is, and we can see that it's really insincere. Okay, and then we have we could go into the example of the subtle product placement. So when something quite critical is happening and there's some drama occurring or conflict occurring, Meryl reaches for and promotes a product. And so we're building a picture there and really providing good evidence where we're drilling into the film, and we're looking at how Peter Weir has constructed using dialogue. You know, and you've got the quotes there, but also you're looking at camera angles, maybe the use of colour, you know, and then conflict and all sorts of things, contrasts, all those sort of things. Lots and lots of things to choose from. And then finally what we're going to do is we're going to finish with our linking statement. Therefore, the dystopian setting challenges audiences to question how highly they value consumerism and the perfect life. And so that's basically what we're going to use as our building block. And once you feel comfortable with that, get in, and then through the editing process start to make it your own.